it's story time. So we're going to start off with a story by Jonathan and a video. And then we've asked 4 mystery guests to come and tell us their story. What we've really asked them to do, they're not mystery guests, they're members of the group here. And what we've asked them to do, to give us 10 minutes each, talking about how they got involved in green, why they got involved in green, what it means to them, why they're here, and particularly to spend a fair amount of that 10 minutes talking about the things that they've tried that have worked, and even equally, if not more important, the things that they've tried that haven't worked. Now, of course, when I asked the people, when I mentioned everything was going fine until I said, and tell us about the things that didn't work. And they both asked, they all asked for another 2 to 3 hours. So we understand that this is not easy and that it takes a lot of trying to make progress in this area, so we're going to learn about that. But first, Jonathan.
Okay, so I'm going to tell a brief story and then show a brief video and then we'll get on. So the story is about the newspapers. So in Baltimore, school district, the worst kids, when I was growing up we called the juvenile delinquents in high school, were segregated and they were put into these classes, and the class was, they had to learn anger management, they had to learn listening skills, they had to learn collaboration skills, they had to learn a whole bunch of skills, and they hated it. And they were getting nowhere with it, and they were not showing up. They became truants. It turned out to be, first of all, identified them as the bad guys. It was a complete failure. So somebody came up with the following brilliant idea. They took all those kids, and they formed a new club that met during club hour. And the club was the school newspaper. And they said, they didn't tell them you're juvenile delinquents or whatever. They just said, you guys are now the newspaper club. And they said, okay, we're going to teach you a bunch of skills. The first week, we're going to teach you how to interview. And that was how they taught listening skills. And then the second one is they said, you're all going to be the editorial committee. And you guys got to decide what is going to be in this newspaper. And they had to learn collaboration skills. And by the way, they had to learn leadership, and they had to learn, all kinds of stuff. It was a huge success. And these kids, of course, turned into stars, and they turned into great successes because they were the newspaper club and not the juvenile delinquency bad guy class. So I tell you that because in shifting behavior, a lot of it has to do with how we frame it and how we engage people. We heard a lot today about making it fun, but it's really, so think about the outcomes that you want to achieve and how you build positive, pro-social, proactive communities about it. The great thing about a story is the story is more powerful than your description of it, so I don't have to tell you anymore. You got the story. Okay, so the next thing is that one of the powerful components of this program is to remember that we're dealing with the environmental issues. So why are we doing all this? Obviously, we're doing this for our residents and our tenants, and we're doing it to make the world a better place. Why are we trying to green our buildings? But we're also in a really complex environmental time. And I was actually talking to a major finance leader earlier this afternoon who said to me, America's response to what happened in Joplin, et cetera, our failure to invest in infrastructure, our failure to recognize the environmental issues before us, show that we are completely unequipped to deal with the issues of the 21st century that are going to come from climate change. So I'm going to show you a 3 or 4 minute video that is about the tsunami.
いおいおい。人いるぞ。人。
It's a little hard to know what to do to follow that. So I'm going to turn that problem over to Patty, who's our first storyteller for the evening. Patty, good luck.
Thank you, John. I guess I have to comment on that because I cannot not comment on it, but I think that what that did for me is it made me that much more dedicated to what my role is at REEF. REEF is the real estate investment arm of Deutsche Bank. I have been with the company for about 6 years, and a little over a year ago, Chuck Leitner, who is the head of REEF, asked me if I would consider participating with him in a sustainability program for REEF. And he prefaced that by saying, I don't have a job description. And I said, I can make one up. So I was all excited by that. And where I came from, in hindsight, is probably, I think that I'm the perfect person for this role. From Chuck's perspective, I'll be honest, he said, you're here, you're available, I want someone to work on this directly with me who's in New York, so you happen to be here. So I went, oh, okay. But I proceeded then to tell him, well, this I think makes perfect sense because I was a math science kid. And for those of you who read the Magic School Bus books or read them to your children, there was this kind of funky science teacher who was all about taking these buses into different parts of the body or the rainforest and this sort of thing. Well, that was my mother. And so I grew up with this combination, Gloria Steinem, environmentally friendly science teacher. And so this was the kind of stuff that we grew up with in our household. We did a lot of experiments in the refrigerator, this kind of stuff. But so I went on from there to be a math science kid. I have a chemical engineering degree. I learned that I was a lot more social than the PhDs that I worked with at Procter & Gamble, so I decided I might go to business school. And so when I was at business school, I decided that I would take some real estate finance courses, not necessarily because I was interested in real estate, but because my fiance turned husband was a builder, and he was really good at building but horrible at the finances. And so then my real estate professor said, why don't you try this for a couple of years? And I said, sure. And I did a field study with him, fell in love with real estate, thought I'd still do it for just a couple of years and then go be president of DuPont or something like that. But then over 20 years later, I'm still in real estate. I started out in property management, so again, I thought, good operational background. But what my real desire was is to get over to the finance side to better understand why it was that we were managing and operating these buildings very efficiently. And I'll have to tell you that when I went from property management to asset management to investment management, and then to this role of director of sustainability, I said, oh, this all makes perfect sense. Because I think that from a sustainability perspective, I look at it from a practical perspective. This really is how we should have been operating buildings from the very start. My chief engineer from back in 1989 called me as soon as he heard that I got this role, and he said, just remember, I taught you everything you know. And I said, in fact, he did, because back then there was a recession. Some of you may remember that. Some of you may not have been born yet. And so back then, we were taught to operate buildings efficiently, take a look at lighting retrofits. Our version then of, toilets that were more water efficient, that sort of thing. So I kind of grew up in that environment again. From a real estate perspective, and then went through the heyday when I believed that it really didn't matter how we managed the buildings to a certain degree, or at least a majority of us, not Jonathan, because he kept doing it the way we were supposed to be doing it. But I think, ultimately, I think when pricing got very high, we got a little lazy. And so I think of sustainability as a rebranding of operational efficiency, our fiduciary responsibility to our clients. I do believe that the environmental definition has been expanded. Not only do we have to worry about landfills and wetlands and dry cleaning fluids and that sort of thing, but now we have to worry about carbon. And so I do think that the environmental equation has expanded a little bit. From that perspective, I think it's also been very helpful from a technology perspective that what used to take me several almost years to convince my portfolio manager to invest in, because there was a 5-year payback, now has a 2-year payback. So it's kind of like walking in snow when you were younger, 5 miles to your elementary school. But I do think that whether it's government regulation or the advances in technology, that we do really have the opportunity to make some great strides from an operational efficiency and environmental responsibility. What I have found to be successful at REEF is we did create a sustainability council that is cross-functional but also geographic. And so that group of 22 people, it's a big council, but we get all different kinds of perspectives. We spend a lot of time building consensus, which is important. 22 of us have a voice on a monthly call. But there are many more people that I just allow to participate. So we have working groups that are focused on different initiatives. So we have working groups focused on our green print commitments, which is really all about getting ourselves in a benchmarking mode. We have a group that focuses on green leases and green fit out. So a variety of different initiatives related to being green. And so those middle managers who lead those working groups are also welcome to listen in, as well as their team members. And so my objective there is to just let this filter through the organization, because it doesn't happen naturally. We've developed principles for sustainability, guiding principles that we've put up on our website, and that really is intended to provide a framework globally for all of our regional folks to take a look at and then understand how to build their own programs within the context of their own context, whether it be different country regulations, mandates, that sort of thing. And then we really have focused, from an engineering perspective, some of the basic stuff, doing lead gap analysis, making sure that everyone is in Energy Star or whatever the local benchmarking protocol is. So some real practical, again, engineering stuff that we learned 20 years ago. And then we're also talking a lot about marketing and how to speak to people about sustainability. What has been tough along the way is, and I think I alluded to this earlier when I kind of introduced myself to the group, is I have some people who really embrace this. And so the key for me is to grab a hold of those folks and encourage them to participate, and then call them periodically and ask them how it's going. I mean, just basic communication. And then encouraging them to take advantage of other resources that we've identified either internally or externally. I do have people on the other end of the spectrum who actually lead large groups and have influence within our organization, who will say, we're not focusing on that this year. And I'm not so sure we're going to focus on it next year either, Patty. Now, I thank them for being open with me, because that way I can put it in my back pocket and kind of figure out, how do I demonstrate to those same folks that there's some value in focusing on this. So I think truly the biggest challenge is just moving the 650-person group that we're within. It does help to have senior leadership buy-in and leadership above my senior leadership, because REEF is a business unit within Deutsche Bank. So Deutsche Bank is very strongly behind this. There's constant messaging in our world. We have our intranet site that allows people to calculate their own carbon footprint. But I will tell you that 80% of the people within REEF do not take a look at that. So there are a lot of, I think, communication challenges. I also started very gung-ho and developed a really full program, and found that when I presented it to people, people just looked at me like, what are you talking about? So, you know, I go back to what John said earlier about being patient, because if you're enthusiastic about this, you really do have to consider who you're talking to and what you talk to them about. There are some people I can talk about, you know, what's going on at the building level and all the different projects we're working on and get all excited about solar. And then there are other people I talk about that with, and they, you know, can't walk away from me fast enough. So I have to, you know, choose my subject matter. Did I cover everything that you needed for me to cover? Yeah, okay. Yes.
And how are you doing personally about this?
Personally at home, or personally? Well, okay, well, and I'll answer the question two ways.
I'll put another. So you're dealing with a lot of complexity and ambiguity.
Yeah.
Where you have the power of encouragement and some authority, but not all the authority you'd like.
Right.
So how is it?
I actually like that, because I view it as a challenge. And so it has persistence as part of my personality. Patience, I can learn to be patient. I know how to step back and be patient. Last year, it felt a little bit lonely, because no one really wanted to talk to me about this. I mean, certain people did. But this year, there's a lot of conversation about it. We have a lot more client inquiries about this, which is good, and so I catch the wave. So there were periods of time when I said, you know, it's 5 o'clock and no one's calling me. What do I do? And so I read a few extra sustainability articles or whatnot. But today, 5 o'clock is long past, and, you know, it's 7 o'clock, and I still have 3 more, you know, phone calls to make to respond internally, particularly to questions. And so I ride the wave. If they're asking, I'm there to answer. So I enjoy it. And at home, my husband will say that he created me, because he was putting funny-looking light bulbs and recycling and doing all these things well prior to, you know, my acknowledging that I had an interest in this. Okay, who's next?
Bill.
You know, Winston Churchill said something like, if you want me to speak for 4 hours, just ask and I can talk on any topic right then. If you're going to give me an hour, I need a day. If you're going to give me 10 minutes, I need 2 weeks. So come back 2 weeks from today and I'll be ready. Okay? To be asked, you know, a couple hours ago to do this, and so now I'm going to condense 25 years or 30 years of work into 10 minutes. And there's 3 quotes you need to be aware of. The first quote is, problems denied and solutions delayed inevitably lead to a costly and painful day of reckoning. That's Paul Iglesias. The second one is, Thomas Friedman says, the only thing bigger than Mother Nature is Father Prophet. And then the last one is good enough is frequently good enough. And that's me, okay? So if you just understand those three, it kind of, everything is going to follow. So for the last, since 1990, I've spent full time in workforce, which we used to call middle. We didn't know it was workforce housing, but it's workforce housing, full market rate workforce housing in across the Southeast, originally in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and now we're in 10 states, okay? And I started in 1990 as like some grandiose title of Director of Capital Markets for this tiny little company, which basically meant I ran around and begged for money to pay for things. And shortly thereafter, obviously the reason they hired me because they were in trouble and they needed somebody to find money, and evidently I wasn't very good because the whole partnership split apart and I ended up being CFO of the new entity, the surviving entity, and then there was one other guy in there. We were running it and we took it public in 94 under a bizarre reverse merger where we ended up on October 1 of 94 with one apartment community and 47 fast food restaurants. But we told everybody we were an apartment REIT. And then we proceeded to slowly build that company up over time until we got to a little under 10,000 units in '05, at which point I had made it to CEO and then chairman of the board. And one day I came in and said, it's time to sell. The market's going to correct. We don't want to be sitting here in this thing. And the board said no. And after a big fight, they finally said yes. And so on February of '07, we sold the whole company to an Australian investment bank. For the highest, I'm told, for the highest premium ever recorded for a public REIT, which was great, except I had to sign a 3-year contract to stay on and run their company for 3 years, which turned out to be the worst 3 years of my life. And we won't go into that, but let's just say my purchaser turned out to be the Australian version of Lehman Brothers. So we went from 72 billion in assets worldwide to, we probably could have taken everybody to Starbucks for coffee in about 120 days. It was a true experience. But during my Babcock purgatory, well, let's go back, because he wants to know about the green. So in 1991, purely from economic reasons, my partner and I, we came across this thing called compact fluorescent bulbs, okay? I remember they were $18.72 a piece, and they wouldn't fit in the fixture, so you had to buy a new fixture. So when you're all over it, they ran about $47 each. And we went to our then board and kind of talked about them, and they looked at we were crazy. So without telling them, I authorized $100,000 to go buy bulbs and fixtures. And within a year, we were saving $100,000 a year on the energy we saved, because each bulb went from like a 70 watt to a 14 watt. And so that sort of led to sort of my next thing, is that activity breeds activity. So once you start doing this, you kind of catch the bug and it just keeps going. But it was always economically driven. So water sub-metering, low flow toilets, better insulation, nothing fancy. I still do nothing fancy. There's not a solar panel to be had. It's all about just whittling away at the edges and trying to improve performance. So that's going along, and we're doing all that, and we're getting all these allocates. And then we get to this purgatory period when I was trying to think what I was going to do in my life after Babcock, and I came up with the concept we called Ginkgo, which was we really wanted to be able to produce market rate workforce housing that was greener. And you couldn't build it, it's just too expensive, and you couldn't do these sort of high B buff ups because they just didn't, the math didn't work. And so the idea was we would buy seriously distressed, physically distressed assets, and my original model was 25 to buy, 25 to rehab with a $750 target rent, and it would all work. And so I went out in the street and went to all my favorite investment bankers who really liked me and who always said, if you ever need money, come and see us. And I went up and down for month after month until I permanently limp now. And everybody said, no, what we want you to do is forget all this greening nonsense and just do your old BNP. Start over with your old company. Do the same thing you've always done. And I just didn't see how it worked. And so actually this meeting, well, I've been to all three of these now, a year ago, probably tonight, standing on the lawn out front, I had finally given up. I said, I can't raise this money, so I'm going to go back and do old BNP. Within 2 weeks, I had a commitment for $100 million. And I came to one of these meetings, and I was sitting listening to all these people tell their stories. And I said, I can't do that. So I went out and stood in. You remember last year it was cold and rainy? I stood in the pouring down rain out in that field out there on the phone telling a guy, an investment banker, that I don't want your $100 million. I can't do it. So we came back and we recommitted to the Ginkgo idea, and I'm proud to say that in August we worked out a deal with Babcock, and I bought back the management company. So I now have my whole management company back. And then in December we worked out a joint venture with a major capital firm here in New York for a $50 million joint venture to go do substantial rehab of properties. So now it's the hard part, I actually have to do it, okay? So that's sort of the green story, and we green, but we don't green, there's no solar panels. This is talking about replacing 40-year-old HVAC systems, replacing 40-year-old windows, replacing unfortunately 40-year-old ductwork, washer, dryers, appliances, it's the total redo of the whole apartment, and then still being able to do it so that workforce people, teachers, policemen, firemen, retail workers, all can have a place that they can live. So that's work, but then there's this other thing, which is the advocacy side, which is I've been a member of ULI for a long time. Love that group. If you've never been there, I think Jonathan will agree, all these people, and it's mostly men, let's be fair, are developers who are used to taking a high degree of risk in order to do projects. They're very committed. It's an interesting group of people to be around. Ego, if we could turn their ego into electricity, we would not have to burn coal. Let's put it that way. But some of it is justified because of the truly incredible group, how they don't take no for an answer. They go get projects done. They take extraordinary risk. And it's an amazing group to be around. But they are not the greenest group who ever lived. So while I'm traveling in Europe, I heard about this thing called responsible property investing, which really came out of the investment world, which was an attempt to merge the social, environmental, and economics of investing, and in my case, in real estate. And so how could you merge those two? And I came back and I was talking to a good friend, and he said, you ought to start a ULI council on that. If you don't know how the council system works, they have these 40 little groups of specialty things. And I thought, okay, that'd be great, that'll be easy. 2 years later, of extraordinary amount of effort, the council started. We actually have, Jonathan has been a member, and Kim has been a member, and Patricia's a member, and I can't see enough. Nathan's a member. It's an extraordinary group of young people, primarily, who are all trying to figure this out, how we merge all these things together so they actually work economically. And now my next thing that I'm going to work on is go back and keep trying to push on ULI to make it this whole concept a more viable part of their mission. But that's what we're doing.
Okay. Very good. You're up, Kim.
Okay. I'm with a real estate developer. We're based in Norwalk, Connecticut. And my background is a long and kind of sordid one in terms of my education. Went to college for a few years, dropped out, started in the construction industry, and ultimately went back to school and finished my education at the Pratt Institute, and then later went to NYU and migrated into real estate. And then went through a bust in the late 80s, so we took back all our properties and I became a property manager, and I learned about the importance of energy saving and water savings and doing things efficiently and improving your buildings and all those good things. So, and I come at it today as a very kind of small entrepreneurial real estate firm. And I'm very fortunate. I have a great partner, Clay Fowler, who was at the first retreat. And together we've kind of migrated the company over the last 20 years to do urban redevelopment projects, infill projects, adaptive reuse projects, both commercial and residential. So the thing that we've never done really is use any of the kind of certification process, the properties we buy are sub-institutional assets, and they always have a lot of issues, older buildings. So we kind of go get the low-hanging fruit. We put the capital where, you know, it's going to be most efficient into an energy retrofit. But we've never really used kind of metrics, quite frankly. So that's one of my goals. It was my goal of my first year here to actually start to kind of formalize it and use metrics. But I finally figured it out last year that I needed a dedicated resource. So my action plan is to bring a young associate and delegate this to her. So, and I'm sure it will be much. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be much more successful. You know, but how did I really, you know, kind of what was the ta-da moment? And, you know, there really wasn't one, quite frankly, but because it was an evolutionary process. ULI had a lot to do with it. I joined ULI in New York in the early 90s, and then by the mid-90s, I was involved in the Westchester District Council. I became a chair, was doing programming, and someone approached us and said, well, we'd like to do a programming about sustainable and green development and practices. So I knew it was kind of out there. I didn't know anything about it. So I said, well, okay, you know, that's great. Let's do it. And so I started to do some research. Well, the morning I got up for the program, to go have this program in Stamford, Connecticut, the New York Times front page article was that there was an ice formation in the North Atlantic, the size of Rhode Island, that fell off into the ocean. So this was the mid-90s. So, you know, to me, that was a really ta-da moment, and really kind of brought home how significant the climate change and you know, it really elevated my thinking and started to think about personal responsibility and things that we could do in our business and so forth. So, you know, in terms of, you know, what I wanted to pay Jonathan a compliment too, because I remember last year, or maybe it was the year before, you happened to say in passing that whenever he leaves a room, he turns out the lights. I always do that now, and I think about it, and every time I do, I think about you and what you had said. You also said sometime along the line that you don't buy land. I wish I would have heard that about 5 years ago. Would have saved us a lot of money. You know, for Dennis, I used to shave in the shower. I stopped doing it, so there is hope for you. One of the things that I've tried to do is what I call RSR, which is rinse, soap, and then rinse again. So you turn off the water in between, usually only in the summer. Our current activities, you know, over the last 3 years, we've been highly impacted, like a lot of real estate companies and real estate developers. You know, we survived. We actually strengthened our team. We've pushed through it. And I have a tendency to think that we're not really doing anything, or that we haven't done anything. And that's not quite right, because when I reflect on it, we have a large-scale redevelopment project in construction in St. Louis. It's going to be delivered this fall. It's 1 million square feet, 600,000 feet of adaptive reuse of a former department store into apartments, hotel, and ground floor retail. And we're in the process of reconfiguring and replanning a large-scale project in Connecticut that we have. We will get approvals for that project to do a multifamily project, and hopefully be in ground by the end of the year. We have a project in Stamford that we acquired about a year ago, which is an adaptive reuse of an industrial building to something. Fortunately, Chelsea Piers, which is a large sports rec operator in New York, signed a lease for half the building, so that's very exciting. They're doing the work, but they are instituting energy-efficient equipment and new roofs and new facades and all that. So that's going to be a big project. And of course, ongoing, we have lots of, you know, we have operating buildings, and we do a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff. We don't really go through any certifications on that. We just kind of, you know, go where the dollars are on it. We look for two-year paybacks. We don't do enough with our tenants, but Catherine's going to take care of that for us. And And then finally, one of the things that we're passionate about is urban redevelopment. We're working in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It's a long, struggling, suffering, small city that for some reason has gotten under our skin, especially mine, and I'm working very hard on it to make it a better place. We hope we can make money doing it. I often refer to it as God's work, quite frankly, because it is a heavy lift, but it's something that I think we can be, have a positive impact on. And then on a personal level, I got involved. I live in Rye, New York, which is on Long Island Sound. It has a historic amusement park that has really kind of lost its financial underpinnings after World War II. But it's on the National Register. It's a beautiful seaside amusement park and public park, almost 300 acres, 100 acres of amusement park, and the county put out an RFP to reinvent it. They restricted residential from it, but they said you can do anything else. There's a lot of constraints on it. It was something that was on my to-do list to try and have a positive impact on because I saw this kind of grand national treasure that had kind of sunk into decrepitude, quite frankly, in my opinion. So I teamed up with some of my neighbors, and Jonathan was part of our team, and we put together a not-for-profit. We raised $150,000 and hired consultants, did a market study, and we've submitted a plan. And it's a very detailed one, as a matter of fact. And I have a copy of it. Not looking for any money. But pro bono work is accepted. Anyway, I'll pass this around if it's of interest to people. Thank you.
Very nice. Before we invite our fourth mystery guest up to tell her story, I'll give that much away. I have a question, if I could ask the three who've just presented. I'm curious. Very interesting stories. Really very helpful, very interesting, well done. So, what I didn't hear, except for a passing reference from Kim, here we are on the evening of the second day of the third conference. Some of you have been for all three of them, on behavior, resident behavior, staff behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what did we hear from these real estate tycoons? The thing, we're talking about the buildings, we're talking about the equipment, we're talking about the money. I mean, this is what, this is the blood and guts of real estate, right? So do you have anything to say about what the conference is about and why are you here? Anybody like to take that one on, Patty?
I spent a lot of time in the last year being very internally focused. So when I approached, the Garrison Institute and this few days, my thought was, what can I take from this to help me move forward, and what's next? And today it came to me that really it's really about being much more external and externally focused, and behavior. We are a little bit disconnected from the actual people at our properties because we have third-party managers. But we have a lot to say about how they relate to folks. But so I think for me, it's just being much more externally focused, getting much more involved in groups like this, because I've picked up bits and pieces, I think, from everyone that I've spoken to here. So and taking a little bit more risk.
Well, and in fairness, I should say that you did talk about the conversations that you have within the company, and with the different people around the world, the different reactions, and how you're learning to interact with them, which is really very much about what the conference is about. And also I should mention that Patty and Ann Fletcher are now the two co-chairs of the ULI District, New York District Council Sustainability Council. So you're definitely welcome to talk. So, sure, there you go, he waved his hand.
I'm moved. Actually, there are probably three issues here. Number one is, at the management company, there are about 750 people in that right now. We're really talking about our need to improve both our training, actually our resident training, as much as anything. And so hearing about these prepackaged in a box training programs has been worth the trip, I can say that, because we really believe that, no matter what we do, if they don't use it properly, it's a waste. The second thing is, the people who work for me would say way too much of my time is spent talking to people about the importance of this at places like ULI, and then a lot of time is spent with investment bankers and financial bankers trying to get them to understand both the importance and the economics of what's going on, because there's a real, I know there's been a lot of talk here about this moral versus economic argument, but I can tell you on the street that's about an hour from here, there's only one conversation, and it's all about money. And right now, the economics and the analysis are totally screwed up. So, discussion of payback periods. I just got to tell you that nobody has ever in 25 years asked me what the payback period for crown molding was, okay? Or for granite countertops, or so there's a whole different set of analysis that's being done on the energy efficiency side and the environmental side, which I believe reflects a total misunderstanding of how real estate works and is valued. But it is an uphill battle because there is virtually no money available in the private sector for this type of work. And so I spend an extraordinary amount of time talking about that, trying to change behavior. And so, my feeling about ULI is if I can change the attitudes of the 28,000 members of ULI, this problem gets solved, okay? Much more than me doing whatever I can do on my own. So that's where a lot of time is going.
That's very interesting. Just a quick comment on the granite countertop question. We had a conference in New York at the Empire State Building last summer on financing for green for development, retrofit, particularly for retrofit. And I remember someone saying very much the same comment. It really struck home that we will be there when that it is actually now time to stop thinking about payback periods, because this is the new granite countertops. This is something you simply do in order to develop a property that people want to buy, rent, live in, etc. The same way you put in the crown molding, the countertops. Forget about all of this add-on payback period stuff like that. I'm not sure everybody's bought that yet, but I think that's the mentality we got to get there. Right.
I get very energized coming and learning, and I love to talk to people and talk shop, so this is a great environment to do it. I think the climate buildings and behavior initiative is very important, and I've seen it kind of evolve now and grow and develop, and I want to be a part of it. And it's great to expand the network to a group of people that are doing such great work and such bright minds here.
Thank you. So a suggestion. Now, who is it that you brought? What's her name again? Catherine, right there. So I would encourage you to consider carving out a certain amount, perhaps a significant amount of your time to work directly with Catherine, to give her the backup, working with residents, working with tenants, showing the importance from the top. Because I think one of the things that we've learned is if the people at the top don't demonstrate by their behavior the importance of this, bright and capable as Catherine is, she won't have the ability to have that impact. I think Patty made the same point, that she gets support from above. So finally, to end the evening, Rachel, tell us your story.
Jonathan did this to me last time. He made me the last speaker before it was time for drinks and sleep. So
Save the best for last.
thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So when John asked me to come up here and tell my story all of 2 hours ago, I think he asked me to drive home towards 3 questions. One was, how did you get here? One was, what's worked? And one was, what hasn't? So what have you learned as a result of it? So I've condensed all of that into 5 takeaways from my, albeit abbreviated, career in sustainability. So the following list that I'm going to present to you is based on my career at USGBC since 2007, and as of Tuesday, my 30 short years of experience. So the first takeaway that I have really has to do with the answer to the first question, which is how did you get here? And it was a winding road. My background is in curriculum development, education, and teaching. I spent 6 years in classroom settings, developing curriculum for second graders, for high school students, and teaching ice skating, of all things. And I was working on a curriculum project. I had moved just for a couple of months to Albuquerque, New Mexico, of all places, and that project unexpectedly got put on hold. And my aunt, who I was shacking up with in her guest house at the time, said, "There's someone who I really think that you should meet." She introduced me to this woman who owned her own small interior architecture firm. And we totally hit it off. And so within 3 weeks, I went from being her intern to her design director. And what was supposed to be a 3-month stay in Albuquerque turned into a 1 year and 3-month stay. And at some point, we were sitting in her office, and we got this email, and it said, "Last chance to register for the Greenbuild International Conference and Expo." And I said to her, "It's in Denver, why aren't we going?" And she said, "Yeah, you're right, we should." So 2 days later, we packed up her husband's pickup truck full of bricks, because apparently that's what you do when you have to drive across the Front Range in a blizzard. And when we got there, I opened the program, and I saw that there were all of these sessions going on around schools, because USGBC was on the brink of launching the Lead for Schools rating system. So I went to a session, and I sat down. I listened to the woman who was running the schools initiative at USGBC at the time. She finished talking. People rushed up to speak to her. I stepped outside. I called my mother. I said, "You can relax. I know what I want to do with my life now." You know, she was like any good mother who had financed her daughter's undergraduate career or time in undergraduate education. She was like very concerned that I was never going to find my way, and she was sending me books with titles like "What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do" and "How to Overcome Your Quarter-Life Crisis." So, chill out, Mom. I'll tell you about it later. So I went back in. I waited in line, and I went up. I introduced myself to this woman. I made sure I was the last one there, and I said, "My name is Rachel Gutter, and I would like to work for you." And I think she was a little caught off guard, and we talked for a little bit, and I was like, "Wherever you're going, I'll just follow you. I'll just talk to you. And then, we were in the Denver Convention Center, and it's like the hugest place ever, but I was like accidentally running into Lindsay like at every available opportunity. I was like, "Oh my God, Lindsay, I can't believe you're here. So nice to see you." So finally, she confessed to me that she was actually planning on leaving USGBC to go to grad school. And so then it became like, "Okay, my name is Rachel, and I want your job. What do I have to do to get your job?" So I kind of like successfully went from like stalker of Lindsay to friends with Lindsay. We were like taking road trips together, and she helped me to understand what USGBC was looking for in a candidate, and told me that they were looking for someone who had experience working in a school district facilities office. So I called another woman I had met at Greenbuild. I said, "My name is Rachel, and we met at Greenbuild, and how would you like a free intern?" And she said, "I've already cleared desk space." So this was all the way back in Montgomery County, Maryland, which was where I was educated. And to get there, I drove cross country in 3 days with all of my belongings in my car. And I got there, and I moved back in with my parents, which I swore I would never do. And I started to blow through my life savings, and about 6 months went by. Maybe it was not quite that long. 3 months went by, and USGBC still hadn't posted the job. And Lindsay at that point had already gone to grad school. So I'm like, what am I gonna do? I could not live with my parents forever. So I ended up getting a job in green building consulting. And through that job, I was writing the Lead for Schools curriculum and the Lead for Schools reference guide as a consultant to USGBC. And I was absolutely miserable. And I woke up once in the middle of the night just sobbing, which had never happened to me before. And I called Lindsay the next day and I said, "I made a huge mistake. I don't know what to do." And she said, "They have 6 copies of your resume, the ones you've been dropping off every month on the day, the first of the month. So just call them. They're waiting for you." So the rest is history. I've been running the schools and higher education initiatives at USGBC for 4 years now. I'm the director of the Center for Green Schools. So my first takeaway is really I look for people that I hire for my team who have similar characteristics to me, and a lot of us probably do that, but for me, I look for people who don't necessarily have the experience, but who have the passion and who have the innate sets of skills. And I say, like, you're never going to find the perfect applicant, the person who has every single skill, especially when it's like a niche field like green schools. And I always say that Jamie, my director of higher education, she is the only person who had an absolutely perfect resume, and that's like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So number one is just hire people who just really want to be there, because they're the ones who are going to show up. Number two is there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach. Everything is personal. Everything is local. And the way that we think about that at the center is we apply the triple bottom line philosophy. It's not even that deep. It's so simple, but if you come back to it, it just makes so much sense. So, this three-legged stool of sustainability, people, planet, prosperity. And what we interpret that to mean at the center is that there's something in this green building conversation for everyone, right? So when we talk to parents about the importance of green schools, we tell the story of Christian Torres, who goes to a school in a very challenging neighborhood in Chicago, who at his old school needed his inhaler 3 times a day, and at his new school hasn't needed it once. When we talk to facilities managers, we talk about the school in Fort Collins, Colorado, that with basic operational shifts and by working with teachers and with students and with staff, they're saving more than $100,000 in operating expenses alone every year. And to tell you the truth, these days we pretty much skip the planet conversation. And it's not because it's not important, it's because all of the people who were going to be compelled by the planet conversation have already been convinced. So we feel like it's time to stop preaching to that choir. And the work that we're doing right now really focuses on deploying that choir to get out to the masses. Which brings me to my third tip. Lobbying is a short-term fix. Partnering is what's truly sustainable. So we work with a lot of different types of decision makers at USGBC and in the center. We have a Mayor's Alliance for Green Schools. We have a 50 for 50 Green Schools Caucus initiative. We have an emergent effort to work with leaders in higher education at under-resourced colleges and universities. We work with students. But in all of those situations, rather than lobbying, rather than getting out in front of the issue and then trying to compel someone to come our way, we partner with them. We put them out in front of the issue. We make them the early adopters. We make them the champions. And so partners who otherwise might be thought of as the keepers of the status quo become the biggest champions for the movement. We started something called the Coalition for Green Schools, and we're working with groups like the PTA, the National School Boards Association, NEA and AFT, the 2 largest teachers unions. The executive committee alone of the Coalition for Green Schools represents more than 10 million members. And they help us to translate things for their members, right? That's the most important part about it. The AFT publishes a 50-page book on why green schools are a union issue. And NEA starts a campaign for teachers called Green Across America. So that approach of really focusing on treating people like equals and speaking their language has helped us to form partnerships with conservative state legislators in Kentucky who are members of the Tea Party and are chairing our Green Schools caucuses. When it comes to those partnerships, my next tip is really about focusing on not necessarily partnering with like-minded organizations. So this one goes against a lot of our instincts, right? Like people always say, like, they're doing something just like you should totally partner with them. And I say, don't do that, because all you end up doing is kind of tripping all over each other, trying to fulfill the same niche. I mean, figure out how you can work together and specialize, but we don't really find that the people who are doing almost the exact same thing as you make particularly good partners. The people who make really good partners are people who are sort of like-minded, you know? So PTA, they care about kids' health, they care about issues like childhood obesity, but they help us to translate green into healthy high performance, because half of their membership shuts down when we use that word. You know, that dissonance with your partners is good, that constructive interference is good, working with people who aren't exactly like you is good, and this is a movement in particular that spends a lot of time in network, and we spend a lot of time talking to each other. So stepping outside of that, it's not always a comfortable thing, it's a very effective strategy. Next is, we say it's all about inclusivity, but I really think it's about exclusivity. So, you know, you should be asking people to compete, even if it's an everybody wins situation. You should be charging admission, even if it's just $1. We had a grant from the Bank of America Foundation to host, actually this was even earlier, we had it was an earlier grant, I guess, from Bank of America. Jamie would be mad at me for not knowing where this money was coming from, because she does all of our keeping of the books. But we had a grant to do lead for existing buildings, operations and maintenance training with school districts. And rather than asking those school districts to apply, we went out and begged them to participate. And that was really dumb, because we were pulling people along who didn't necessarily want to be there, you know? And by not opening that up and letting people tell us why they wanted to be there, we just got really mixed results from that program. We had some people who were super engaged, and we had some people who were really just going along with it because, I don't know, because we did a good job of convincing them to come. And then recently, we posted an application for district-wide sustainability training, basically several days worth of district-wide sustainability training. And unlike this previous one, where we paid for all the expenses and we brought your staff meals and we were going to show up there and at no cost to you, this one you have to pay your own way to come to Washington, D.C. We had 30 spots and 45 applicants. So, you know, asking people to let you know why they want to be there creates a perceived sense of value. And you know, on the issue of behavior and what actually changes behavior, it's really that perception. It's not the actual dollar amount. It's, I invested something to be here. I gave a part of myself to be here rather than someone just handed it to me. And my final tip, my final takeaway from the time that I've been at USGBC, intellectual agreement is not inspiration to act. This was something that our head of communications and one of my mentors, Judith Webb, tells us all the time. Intellectual agreement alone is not inspiration to act. Just because somebody agrees with you doesn't mean that they're going to change their behavior. Just because one of the greatest leaders in the entire green movement knows that it's bad to waste water, he still shaves in the shower. So you have to, and I'm going to tell on you, yeah. You have to compel people in other ways. It's not enough just to give them the logic. And so the final thing that I want to share is a story, because we've really found that storytelling, like what we've done tonight, is the most effective way to change people's minds. So I'm going to close with a story that, like any good environmentalist, we reuse and reuse again and again, because it is just that powerful. And since all of you in your own ways touch on the work of buildings, I think that this one will hit home. For those of you who were at Climate Mind and Behavior, I apologize because you're hearing this for a second time. And to Jamie, I'm especially sorry because you're hearing this for a 100th time. So every year, USGBC and the center support a national competition called the School Building Week School of the Future Design Competition. It is it's a competition that challenges middle school students to design their dream schools. So it's an exercise in dream big. Anything is possible. Swimming pools on the roof, roller coasters in the in the park. Whatever you want to do, sky's the limit. And I judge the national competition every year, but a couple years ago, they asked if we would host the regional competition at our offices in DC. So the first team came in, and they were from Montgomery County, which you'll recall is where I went to school, and was one of the first school districts in the country to have a green building program. It's well known for delivering incredible education across a really wide demographic of students. And these kids came in and they put their model down, and it was the most tricked out green building any of you have ever seen. We call that eco-bling. You know, it had wind turbines and fisheries and moving livable walls and solar panels. It was amazing. And then it was time for the kids from DC to present. We're all familiar with DC schools and that reputation. And these kids came in, they put their model down on the table. And the judges started looking around at each other like a little bit confused, because the model that they had put on the table was really nothing more than a brick box. It had little windows. There was nothing of visual interest. And these kids stood in front of the judges and they said, "This is our dream school. We dream of a school that has windows that you can see through, bathrooms that work, a place where we can all go to do our homework together, and 4 basketball hoops instead of 2 so that we won't have to spend all recess waiting in line." When we try and help people to understand that facilities matter, that facilities impact education, and that they impact a child's ability to dream about his or her future, do you think those kids say, when I grow up, I want to be a green builder? You know, do you even think they think, when I grow up, I want to go to college? I mean, it just, every time I tell that story, it hits me all over again, that is really so much about what the Green Schools conversation needs to be. It's about creating a space where students feel valued and where they feel like they have a real role to play in being part of the solution. So, thanks.